Right, well, let's begin. So, hello and welcome to the CFO Debate Live. My name is Christopher Argent, founder of Generation CFO. We aim to support the much needed debate around the future of the CFO and the finance function and the impact being brought about by new talent and new technology. Just a bit of housekeeping first. Now, you can move your screen around. There's a presentation view where you see the presentation. There is a speaker view where you focus on the speakers. And obviously, you can see myself and Dynshaw at the moment. We're trying to keep this as engaged as possible. So if you look at your control panel, you should see a Q&A box where you can ask questions as we go, and I will try and bring them in at the relevant time. And you can raise your hand to flag that you have asked the question, and we'll be having a few polls as we go through as well. So it would be good to get a consensus of what everybody's going through at the moment, not just our points of view. So enjoy the show. Right, today we're joined by CFO of Soldo.com, Dynshaw Italia, who is in an exclusive position of being both the finance leader of his company, but also the user of his company's products, as Soldo is a spend and expenses management platform, complete with its own MasterCard cards. So Dynshaw's able to give us a sort of unique perspective on how tech can enable CFOs during the COVID crisis. So good morning, Dynshaw.
Good morning, Chris. Hi.
How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you.
And whereabouts are you in the world? Because we've spoken to, we've got a few people from around the country. Are you in the UK?
So I'm in London at the moment, Northwest London, in my house, preserving the lockdown situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a tricky one for everybody, but I think we're all going through the same thing. And I think that's kind of where I wanted to start, actually. From your perspective, let's just jump straight in and talk about your current priorities from your perspective as a sort of growth CFO, a startup CFO. What are the things that are bubbling to the top for you, maybe over the past few weeks, but also, as we've realized that this is going to probably continue for a while?
So I think preservation of cash is probably the most and the fundamental thing that we are looking at. And when you look at preservation of cash, you go down to cost control, streamlining of costs. You look at sort of stronger monitoring and control of spend. You actually have to look at budgeting and reforecasting, because that's something that you have to look at because the whole environment has changed. Yeah. I'm trying to look at other sources of funding. The government is providing some good loan options. It's looking at obviously the furlough options, the deferment of VAT and PAYE. Obviously looking at employees. You got to look after your employees. At the same time, you can make use of the government schemes. Yeah. These sort of situations also, what you have to look at is, can you pivot your business and look at new sources of revenue? Because maybe your existing sources of revenue fall apart. So we are looking at new use cases, new geographical markets where they're not that, where they're opening up earlier than sort of the UK. Of course, looking at how to deal with customers, suppliers, and then planning for the new normal as well, because things are going to change.
Yeah, it sounds like a very similar set of priorities for a lot of people. But I think there's one thing that I'd like to pick up on, which is pivoting during this time. Generation CFO has a very broad kind of audience, and obviously you're in a growth company. Do you feel that you're able to pivot? Are your priorities maybe different to some of the more established companies? Because we talk a lot about agility and trying to sort of be a bit more agile, but
But you have to be, because if you look at our business, for example, one of our use cases was using our card for travel and expenditure. Yeah. Now, travel and expenditure has gone down to more or less 10% of the level that it was before. So if we only were to rely on travel and expenditure, we would have 10% of our revenue today. So you have to look at what are the use cases, what are people spending on today? Is it still shopping? Is it still those areas? What's happening in terms of the crisis? Can we help the governments use our technology so that we can get, so that they can control spend that they are giving to people for maybe food or for their first responders and stuff like that. So it's always thinking about how can I actually generate revenue from other sources? Because if you stand still, you won't survive. Right? And that's the reality. And I see this in startups. Fortunately, I've been a CFO of startup to scale businesses throughout my career. And the one thing that I've learned is you just cannot stand still. I mean, that's the one big difference is you just have to keep innovating. You have to keep looking at things, have to keep adapting.
Yeah. And, do you think that sort of growth companies have an advantage there, maybe compared to sort of the larger companies where maybe their governance is a bit more fixed or their processes are a bit more sort of fixed because of the larger operation? Or is it just more of a mindset thing that we need to be a bit more kind of entrepreneurial in our CFO positions?
I think there is a mindset thing, and I think also the situation demands that you have to be flexible. So in a growth company, things are changing so fast. I mean, if I give you an analogy, think of an F1 race where somebody's coming in to change their tires, right?
Yeah.
So a pit stop.
Yeah.
There is so much that you need to look at in terms of when you change it, how long it's going to take to change, and all the things that go along. So that's what a sort of normal CFO would look like. But in a growth CFO, you have to change that tire when you're going at 100 miles an hour. That's the analogy that I can look at, because things are just thrown at you every day. It's different. And I'm sure people here will understand that you get up in the morning and there's a new challenge. And one of the big differences that I see and face is I think we are in a growth and startup phase. We can't be too proactive. Unfortunately, we are more reactive to things that are happening, and that's probably one big difference I see as well. If you're an established business, you probably have time to think and probably be more proactive. And in a growth business, it's just pure reaction to what's happening and the challenges that are thrown at you.
Yeah, and I suppose no one could plan for this one, so being reactive and if you've got a continuity plan, then fantastic. But I think most people would be reactive in this situation given the circumstances. So let's just go back to one thing that seems to be on everybody's radar at the moment. The phrase "cash is king," right, has never been truer. And I think that's one thing that we are all zeroing in on now and for the foreseeable future. So how are you managing sort of cash at this point in time, without talking confidentially, but just what are your practices, your sort of thoughts on cash management?
Sure. So I actually don't believe that's a true statement today. Cash is king. I think cash is now God. It's actually gone one level higher. It's as simple as that. And the challenge you face is how do you manage cash without killing your business? Because you need to survive, but at the same time, you need to be ready to act when things get better. There's no point putting something in place that will destroy your business to such an extent that you're literally starting from scratch when you end up at the end of the lockdown period. So the things that we are doing, and maybe I'll also generalize it based on my previous experience as well, because I've been unfortunate to have gone through two crises. One is the dot-com crash when I was with the dot-com company, and also the financial crisis that happened in 2008. So these are two similar situations. Okay, this is slightly different. So the first thing that we look at is zero-based budgeting and forecasting. So literally have to start from scratch, re-looking at costs, contracts, right from start to see where you are. Of course, when you do zero-based budgeting, one thing you have to look at is you have to have a benchmark of historical costs that you've incurred, because otherwise you'll miss some costs because you think you've not been incurring them, but you'll miss them. Yeah. It also forces you to make decisions and look at restructure. So I think when you're growing, you become a bit complacent. And this is with everybody. I spoke to one of my friends who's a CEO of a startup fashion company. And she said that she's totally relooked at her cost base for the first time. And she just wished she did it 2 years ago, because she would have been a totally different business. But when you're growing, you just don't do that.
Yeah.
You have to look at restructure. You have to look after your employees. So might as well take use of the furlough scheme so you're protecting their jobs.
Yeah.
You've got to look at additional sources of capital. I mean, it was really interesting. The government just put up this, I think, bounce loan scheme.
Yes.
For
Yeah.
a small startup business, it literally takes, Chris, 1 minute to go to your bank, fill in the form, and £50,000 approximately, or 25% of your revenue, is in your bank the next day.
Yeah.
The CBILS loan scheme is a little more difficult because you have to be able to, it's more complicated, but there's some structures. The VAT deferment and all that is quite a good scheme.
Yeah.
You then also need to look at sort of suppliers. So in this, it's very easy to say, let's screw your suppliers and not pay them. But if your suppliers don't survive at the end of this, you won't have a business.
Yeah.
So the question is, how can you make use of this situation? How can you negotiate with them so you're paying a lower amount, but you're paying them something so that they can survive? Then you look at your customers and you think about, okay, what do I do with my customers at the moment? So for example, not in this business, but in my previous business, we were factoring or invoice discounting. And in a downturn, factoring or invoice discounting is a negative impact on your business, while in a positive, it's a positive impact. So with customers, you have to think about, how do you protect your customers, at the same time, how do you get cash quickly? So maybe offer them credit card payment options so they can pay you by their credit card.
Yeah.
And I tend to see, I've noticed that in businesses in a crisis, you switch from an acquisition mode to a retention mode. How do you retain your existing customers, and maybe less on acquisition throughout that? And then one more thing I just want to add is, one other thing that's really important is you need to fail faster on stuff that you're doing. And this is really critical. And what I mean by that is, you're always trying out new things as a startup or a growth company. And the ability to cut what's not working is absolutely critical. And you can only do that if you have the data at the back of it to actually show you where things are not working. Yeah.
I agree. I completely. You know, I think when I used to be a divisional CFO and you know, now do different things. But when I listen to you talk through all of those activities, I kind of get a sense that, you know, there's a lot of unsung heroes in finance, because to a certain extent we've always done this, right? We've always managed cash. We've always looked at working capital. We've always tried to, you know, budget and forecast properly. But now it's just that everybody is looking at us, and it's a truly important thing today, because it all comes back to cash, right? It's all coming back to your cash flow forecast. You know, do you think there's a sense that, you know, we've got an opportunity to really add value to the business here, because this is a core skill of ours? And if we are going to do this properly, how difficult is it to do? And I suppose I mean cash flow forecasting specifically, because that's what's going to make decision making around loans and funding easier.
So on your first point, it's an interesting point. I think in a crisis, what happens is you get more buy-in on what you're doing. Right. So when there's not a crisis, you're still doing all these things, but you don't really get support from everybody to actually go and implement these spend saving options, or whatever you want to call them, because people are just focused on other priorities. But what you do get when in a crisis is you get that priority on what you're doing, and so you get more of a lens to actually do and deliver that. But it's critical to have cash flow forecasting. And when I mean cash flow forecasting, what I find sometimes is people will only do a P&L and EBITDA forecast, and they won't look at the balance sheet and the cash flow. They won't look at the biggest critical piece, which is working capital. And your working capital in a crisis totally changes, because are your customers actually going to pay you the way they were paying you before? Probably not. And so how do you forecast that? I actually think in a crisis, cash flow forecasting is probably easier, because you're more forecasting costs than revenue, because forecasting revenue in a growth is much harder. What is difficult is forecasting when things will get better. And that's the biggest challenge. So what assumptions do you use to say, actually, things are going to go back to normal by September, or things are going to go back to normal by January? So
Yeah.
that's the tricky bit. And I guess as a CFO, you have to take the most conservative view as to when things will actually happen. And history has shown us that probably, and if you look at SARS, things are going to get better for 2-3 months, and then probably you're going to have a second wave and things are going to go down again. So are you planning for that? Are you thinking about that? And what happens at that point in time?
Yeah, so I love it. I think it's a great comment, and I've definitely seen a lot of people talk about scenario planning, and we've gone from 2 scenarios to 20 scenarios because there's so many different drivers. But I think one thing I'd like to dig a little deeper on is kind of controlling the controllables. And you mentioned zero-based budgeting. What is it about ZBB that really helps you at the moment to kind of control part of that forecast?
So I think your zero-based budgeting is all about literally saying, okay, you know the situation that you're in today, assuming you're starting from scratch, let's build a budget, in effect.
Yeah.
So and then you have to, and this is a critical piece, you have to be able to look at what you were spending historically to check that, okay, you've said now going forward you need to set these budgets, but why have you missed out A, B, C, D, E that you had historically? And then somebody says, oh, I forgot about that. And then it has to probably come in. So that's critical, because otherwise you'll really miss costs that you thought you've committed to in the past, and then you've just missed it in your budgeting going forward. So that's absolutely critical. I also think for zero-based forecasting, it has to be an inclusive process. So you as a finance team cannot do that on your own. It has to be with the owners of the budget that are involved in doing that. And that's a critical piece. So what you're saying is tailor your business going forward to the conditions and the revenue that you're going to generate going forward, in effect.
Okay.
And then you have to control and monitor that then to the next stage.
So I'd like to ask the audience a question around this, and we're going to have a poll question, and it's around ZBB. ZBB's been around for years, right? But I think it's definitely, as you said, it's definitely a strong use case for it now. So I'm going to launch a poll. If everybody can have a look at their screen and answer the poll that's on screen now. So have you implemented ZBB budgeting as part of your crisis response? And the answers are yes, no, already used it, or not sure, unaware. And I think this would be an interesting one because, like I said, ZBB has been around for a long time, but it may not have always been people's sort of first choice when we are in a business as usual environment. So, right, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to publish that result. And it's pretty emphatic, actually. Hopefully you can see that on screen. But 59% of people have not implemented it as a response, and 14% of people already had it. 11% of people have implemented it as a response. So, Dynshaw, what would you say to people who have not implemented this at the moment? Because it's quite a small number who were already there and who have brought this in as a crisis response.
I think you should. I think you have to reforecast based on the situation that you're in, and therefore you have to start a new budgeting process. And what it will do is it will pick out and force you to look at contracts that you may have in place that you may have to renegotiate out of. It'll force you to look at things like subscriptions of things that you're paying for that you no longer need, or probably weren't even aware you were paying them. And especially as you scale, there's so many expenses that are going through your business that you're not tracking it in the way maybe you as finance are tracking it and you think it's useful, but the budget owner may have had mixed panel that he was using before, but he's no longer using it or stuff like that. So you get to find expenses, and you will find expenses that you no longer need and you can negotiate out of. And it'll also keep you more disciplined, because cost savings and limiting and reducing your cost in this phase of the business is absolutely critical. And so I think if you're not doing it, I would recommend that at least you do that for the crisis phase of the business.
Okay.
Not necessarily going forward. That's a debatable thing, whether you need to do it every 2 years, every 3 years. I've actually not used it other than when the entire business model is changing.
Yeah, yeah. Great. I've moved on to this sort of a slide here. It's quite a busy slide and we're not going to go through it. But the point is that, I've seen lots of research come through in the last sort of couple of weeks around sort of zero-based budgeting and how we should be responding. And I think you touched on how we should treat our suppliers as well as our customers. And as someone who used to work at the John Lewis Partnership, we absolutely treated our suppliers as well as our customers. And I think it all comes in to this discussion around, controlling the controllables and making sure that, these decisions are all impacting our cash as we want them to be impacted. So I've got a second poll question here, and I just wanted to sort of remind people that you can ask if the technology is working, a Q&A throughout this. So if you have any questions to Dynshaw, any questions around these subjects, any comments around these subjects, we'll pick it up at the end or ask them now. But we've got, just a second poll question here. Obviously a lot of people hadn't moved to ZBB, and we're curious around your current systems, because it's all well and good the research saying that we need to bring more rigor and response to our spend control, but do we actually have the platforms and the systems in place to manage that? So we're gonna show the next poll question now. If you have a look at your screens, it's, does your expense management system enable rapid and rigorous response control? Yes, no, or not sure. And apologies about technology fail there. It's classic timing, but the show must go on. Right, so I'm going to end the poll in 2, 1. Great. Okay. And I'll just share the results from that now. So 35% say yes, which is good, which means that, as Dynshaw has explained, you might be in a position to do more, because one of the things that I think is needed is that data granularity, right? The granularity and history of what you've done in the past to be able to bring in a bit more rigor. But the majority, 51%, saying no, they haven't. So, so interesting. Is that a surprise to you, Dynshaw? Would you say that you're in a fairly unique position having, this product at your disposal?
No, it doesn't. It's you're going to have various methods of controlling spend. Ours is probably a unique method of doing it. I'm surprised 51% don't have it, or some method of spend. So that is surprising. But
yeah,
again, each company is different, and maybe they have their own internal system of controlling spend, and they treat that as
I think, am I surprised? I'm not surprised, actually, because, we did some research a couple of weeks ago on the impact of priorities and tech in the COVID climate. And I think prior to the crisis, expense management would not be in the top 5 priorities for a finance community. It's discretionary spend. It's probably not a significant spend overall. And it would be left pretty much to the budget holders' devices. But it was, memory serves me well, it was 4th out of 20 in terms of priorities. So I think, there's a bit of a problem here, if we're saying that it's, you know, a massive priority, it's fourth on our list, and we don't necessarily have the spend tools to manage that quickly, and it's definitely a quick win in terms of cash flow forecasting, then there is a bit of a problem there. But let's let's go a bit deeper, and we'll talk specifically about Soldo now, because I've been interested in the product, and I think it's a good one for you to bring to life for people now.
Oh, sure.
So maybe just a quick, you know, what is Soldo, you know, as a very high level, and you know, there's a sort of implied message here that it's almost sort of, it's quite quick to use, it's real time. So, you know, what's
so it's smarter business spending. It's basically bringing your entire business-wide spending into one place, and you can actually control the spend at a very micro level. So either at a company level, department level, individual level, and you can set budgets for it. And the most important thing is you track it real time. And because our product is fully integrated, we have our own e-money license, so we are directly linked with MasterCard. You actually see everything real time. So the minute somebody uses a Soldo card to spend, it's on your screen. You can see immediately that spend, and based on the category it is, you'll be able to see it visibly. If you go to the next slide, Chris, I can take you through in very quickly. I don't want to spend time here trying to sell the product, but I'll just take you through very quickly the slides. So here it's fairly simple. So you put in money in the company wallet, and then you can set up cards with employees, or you can set up cards for projects, or set up cards for departments. And you can set up either virtual cards, or you can set up plastic debit or prepaid cards. And then you can move money into these department projects or into the individual cards as and when you like. Next slide, please. And then what you do is you actually then are able to allocate a budget to the card. So you can, and money is transferred instantly. And because you can keep multi-currency wallets, you don't have the issue of, so you could have a Euro card, you could have a GBP card, you could have a USD card. So you don't have this, you have less issues with exchange rate fluctuations and losing money on exchange rates and stuff like that. Yeah. Next slide, please. And then what you can do is you can actually assign, create expense centers for departments and projects. You can assign cards to individual users. You can set permissions. So there's a lot of control that you can have as to the roles people will play with the cards. All that can be done. Okay. And then it's next slide. And then it starts to get interesting. So now how do you control it? So you can set and create budgets on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a daily basis, and you can set it up such that the money is transferred to these cards or the wallets automatically. So you can say on the first day of the month, first day of the week, first day of the day, at this time transfer money, or when a balance is reached £500, then top it up, or whatever the case may be. Yeah. Next.
Just a quick one on that. Yeah. You know, I've had a question here. You know, which currencies does it cover?
So currently, Euro, USD, and GBP are the key currencies that we cover.
Okay, let's move on.
And then this is where it becomes really interesting, because once you've set this up, now you can really put in rules. So you can allow users to use cards online or not. You can allow or don't allow them to use the contactless facility. You can allow or don't allow them to use it at ATMs. You can set a geographical parameter saying that, okay, only use in the UK or only use in this geography. You can set expense categories as well. So only allow this card to be used in hotels or restaurants. Don't allow them to be used anywhere else. If you try to use it anywhere else, it won't work. And then you can even set daily, weekly, or monthly spend limits, and even a maximum amount per transaction. So you're literally controlling it on a granular level. So even if somebody wanted to use the card for something else, they could. Or if they did want to, and it was outside these rules, you can actually top up their card or change the rule in a second through the web console.
Yeah.
Next.
And just a quick one on that. how do you control the spend? Is it that the merchant sets up a category and then you kind of select those categories?
So there is so MasterCard has what is called a merchant expense category coding that they already set up that's quite universal.
Okay.
And you can actually switch on or switch off those categories. And there's a huge list. And so you can be very specific and say, I want it only for travel and I want it only for car rentals, for example, companies. And you could then switch that on, or you could switch on everything and just switch off gambling, for example. I can't use on gambling, can't use on this. So you have that ability to control it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I think gambling will be the first to go.
And then, of course, we have an app that allows you to capture the spend. So every time you incur a spend, automatically the app will capture the date, the amount, the vendor who you spent with. And all the user has to do is attach a receipt and choose the expense category. Sometimes we can automatically pick up the expense category based on the vendor as well. And so they're putting in very little information, just adding the receipt, and that's it. They've stored the information, and if you go to the next thing, I'll show you how that works. So
I've just got a couple of questions here. It's relevant to this slide. So, it's real time information to you, but how quickly can you respond? If you wanted to stop a card or if you wanted to, open a new one.
So the idea is you set the rules so that the spend is happening within the rule set that you've set.
Okay.
Right. Once they've already spent it, so if it's within the rules, obviously you can't stop that. But what we've had a lot of use cases where people, investment banks, for example, are notoriously tracking spend. And in fact, they have rules such as if you're taking a client out for lunch, there's a maximum amount, and if you're taking a spouse, you can't charge the spouse's amounts in this. So they're really focused on cost control. In that, where one of the rules you can set up is, and they want to actually allocate, and I'll talk about the next slide, which is quite relevant. They want to allocate the expense to a client. So we have this auto tagging system where you can have a client list that allows you. So if I'm a legal firm, I have a list of clients. So when I'm spending money regarding that particular client, I can choose the client name and tag it, so that I don't have to worry about it later. At the end of the month, I can just print a report and invoice the client, and all the backing is with it. Okay. So you can actually set so that if you don't choose a client code when you spend the money, or you haven't attached a receipt, you can just block the card from that day onwards until they've done it. So you can have some kind of control so that your people, because a lot of expense management is behavioral change as well. How do people react? How are they actually spending their money? Are they doing the right things? And so you can control a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, I think this is the next one. If you go to the next slide. Yes, so reporting is very important, because if you remember expense, normally what people do, they spend on their card at the end of the month. They have to get all their receipts. They have to attach it. They have to reconcile it. Finance then pulls their hair out saying, this receipt is not attached, and where is this expense? And it's a nightmare at the end. So what we have is a reporting capability that actually pulls in every single department or user expense reporting and automatically attaches all the receipts with it. So you have it all in one report, and that is then all reconciled and then go straight into your accounting platform as well. And the next slide shows you actually that we can integrate with any accounting platform through an API, but we are already integrated with QuickBooks and Xero, so you actually don't have to do much work. So when you're actually choosing the expense category, it's actually the expense category in Xero or in QuickBooks already. So it's automatically getting pulled. The journals go straight into the system straight away.
Like it.
And
I
then
think you covered a number of the questions that are coming in there.
Yeah, and then the last slide, I just want to take you through. Obviously, we're trying to manage spend in a number of different areas. Our first use case, as I mentioned before, was travel and expenditure, which was, and it's basically you're giving employees cards and you're setting weekly and restricting their expense to a particular category, in which case it would be travel or restaurant spend. And it makes it easier, no painful reconciliations at the end of the month, no chasing receipts. Then we had to change and look at new use cases. And one use case that's come up is digital marketing, for example. So a digital marketing agency has a number of different clients spending in a number of different areas. So what this agency does is it has virtual cards for every client, and then it has virtual cards for every spend like Facebook or Google. So every time a card is used to spend with Facebook for a particular client, it's easily trackable. And you can set limits, you can set budgets, so it can't be used anywhere else, and it's instant. So the minute you spend it, it's on your console and you see it. This person was spent and so much. Another use case that we had was for fuel, for example, for logistics companies. Give their drivers all a Soldo card and put a £500 limit on the card that can only be used for fuel. So that, therefore, they just have a fuel card, they use it, you know what they're using, it's live and it comes up. And then, of course, during a crisis, you have to, like I said, innovate and you have to create. So one of the things that we've done is in Milan, for example, the municipality wanted to get food vouchers to people. And so what we said is, rather than using food vouchers, why don't you give them all a Soldo card? It's obviously more empowering. Food vouchers is maybe not as good as money.
Brilliant.
And then what they can do is they can actually set a limit saying, let them spend per day, per week, per month, the amount of food, so that they just don't go and buy all the food in one go and then they have nothing left. If the crisis continues, you can top up the card. You don't have to go through the logistics of sending them cards again. But also, the money is always the municipality's money till they spend it. So if for some reason, some of the people haven't spent that money, you can just take it back from the card into your wallet and the government has that money as well. So there's no wastage either. So it was a really good use case that maybe we can apply in the UK, and we're trying to do that, and maybe give first responders cards so that they can use it for travel, use it for food, and you can continuously monitoring what they use it for and top it up if they need more.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's very very pertinent use case for anybody, any key worker out there who might be having to submit their own expenses, and probably it's not high on their list at the moment. But just a clarification question here. You know, are these generally debit or credit cards, or does it vary? Because, you know, I think there's a sort of implied question within a question here that this could be a way of funding short-term expenditure. Is it normally?
It's not a credit card, so it's a prepaid card, and later on it'll also be a debit card. But right now it's prepaid, so you top up the money from your company wallet, and then you push it on to the departments, and you push it on to the various employees.
Okay, and as you said before, it's managed as an overall wallet level, so it's not like you lose, you know, the opportunity to use it. It's being managed overall.
And you have a really nice console, which I haven't shown you, where you can actually each user could see different things. So a manager of finance will be able to see all his employees' costs and the entire finance department costs. Or a CFO could see the entire company's costs and where it's being spent and what's in each wallet, what's in each card, and real-time spend that's happened to date, last month, this month, all different things.
You know, it's great to sort of see it as a sort of an innovation product, as well as just maybe what people kind of overlook as a finance operations product, and maybe not seen as, you know, the most important thing out there. I think these things are super important. I've got quite a few questions coming in, which is fantastic. Keep asking them and we'll go through them over the next sort of 10-15 minutes, and if we can't answer them now, we'll answer them afterwards. But there's a really great general question here, which is, you know, is now the time to be improving technology and driving sort of process and product efficiency, given that, you know, there is a plethora of priorities out there, and And I think one of the arguments that I've seen around this is that, there's a lot of marketing happening from technology companies at the moment saying, look, you should have done this yesterday. But my challenge is what's the time to value? Is this a 10-day thing, or is this a 10-week thing?
So fortunately for our product, and I'll start with that, you could be up and running with our product in 24 to 48 hours. Everything is cloud-based. It's an app. You can order the cards. You can have virtual cards from day one, or you can order plastic cards, which will be with you in 48 hours. So this,
Wow.
to start to finish, you can have it immediately. So that's not an issue. But the general point about adopting technology and tier things, if it's going to take time, is a valid one. In a where your priorities are over the next 3 to 6 months, will you have time to integrate new technology right now? Will you have time to divert into that? It's a valid question, and I think it's a difficult one to answer. Maybe you have time because nothing's going on to do it. Maybe it's a good time to do it. You could look at it for an argument from that point of time if your business is at a standstill.
Yeah.
Or maybe the too many things happening and priorities are changing every day, so therefore maybe it's not the right time to do it.
Yeah.
But for us, it's immediate, so it would be silly not to do it because you could make a difference and an impact more or less instantly.
Yeah. There's a sort of linked question here, which is there seems to be a common theme that finance needs to do more in a sort of tech enablement space. Maybe not now, as we've sort of said, it depends on time to value. But do you think overall this is going to help with a paradigm shift for finance engaging with technology? Because we've had to do it from a home working point of view. So do you think it may help the shift?
I think so. If you break it down, so where do you use technology? So one is automation, which I think is fundamental. When you scale a business, you have to use more technology to automate your processes rather than not. The second is the availability of data, which is becoming more and more important. So how do you capture data? How do you give the right insights for data? Because there is a school of thought that says there's too much data and you just make no sense of it. So how can you access data and then make sense of that data is really important. And then the third element is how can you have information real time? Because the quicker you have information, the better your decision making is. So can you use technology in all these three areas? Of course, and we should be using more, and more we can do, the better.
Yeah, I think from our own kind of experience in Gen CFO, if you try to do something end to end, you get much more value. You get that sort of multiplier effect. So it's, as you've said, it's maybe not bringing in automation across everything. It's actually bringing capability in one process, which kind of has that multiplier effect. Great. So there's another a question here about maybe the tool specifically. It's like, how would you be notified, and do you manage exceptions, or do you actually need to manage the system? I suppose people are asking how much work is involved managing something like the Soldo product.
When you say exceptions,
so if the breaks in the rules that you've set up.
So the breaks, you won't have breaks in the rules because it just won't allow you to use the card. So if it doesn't meet the rules, you won't. So the tricky bit will be then if you actually have to use the card, then you have to have the ability to contact somebody and actually do it. What we are building right now, which is not there in the system, is that actually it could be just a simple, if you want to use the card, you could do it on the app, and the person who is your boss or your authority could actually give you the authority literally by just using it in the app and come back to you. So those sort of functionality will continue to be added, and the product will continue to get better and better. Yeah. But right now it's all about setting the limits upfront so that you don't spend or overspend on areas that you shouldn't be spending on. And you can actually control, because subscriptions is a great one. I mean, most people, the challenges that you face with subscriptions is quite a lot, because And if you specifically have one virtual card just for subscriptions, you can set the limit, you can manage it much better, and control it much better.
Yeah, I'm sure Microsoft Teams and Zoom have an awful lot of, one-off subscriptions at the moment, which could quite easily come under an enterprise subscription if you had the data, the visibility of that. So maybe sort of an extension of that, we've got another question here. Do you see kind of an increased efficiency within the team as a result of bringing something in like this? And maybe not just Soldo, but this sort of technology enablement generally, how does it free up a finance team?
So the first one is on the back office side, it frees up a lot of time because you're not spending so much time doing reconciliations, chasing people for things like receipts, trying to allocate the expense to the right category, all that sort of piece, trying to match it to the invoice that you've got from Google or whatever the case may be. So the back office function becomes much more efficient, and it gives you much more time and frees up a lot of your time. That's the first.
Yeah.
The second thing is you get very few surprises because you set the controls up front. You don't suddenly say, okay, why was this spent? How did you spend it? Who approved it? Why did he approve it? All that sort of stuff. So it helps in that. And I think generally with technology, it should take away a lot of the manual processes that you have. That's the beauty of technology. You automate the processes that you don't need to spend time on. And then you're free to then spend more time on value-added processes, insights on what's happening, what is not working so you can fail faster, that point that I was making. Do you have the data to do that? Can you identify very quickly, this really doesn't make us any money. This is why are we spending money on this? Let's just cut it. Those sort of decisions, then that's where you should be focusing. Where is your next funding coming from? How are you going to deal with investors who are in a growth company? That it's a nightmare. You don't have, if you're fundraising, you don't have time to do anything else.
Yeah.
So it's all those sort of things that you got to keep thinking about where you need more time probably.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So another question around kind of maybe Soldo's sort of background in terms of management and funding as a company. If people are paying into Soldo to then use this tool, people at this time might feel that they don't necessarily want to be passing cash to a company that they've only just met. So what's sort of Soldo's guarantees around this? And
so that's a good question. So first and foremost, we're a well-funded, well-backed company. We have funded by blue chip VCs. But more importantly, that's irrelevant because we are regulated by two authorities. We're regulated by the FCA and we're regulated by the CBI in Ireland for European businesses, thanks to Brexit. And so when you're regulated by an entity, you actually don't hold client money yourself. It's held in a segregated account that's totally secure and totally under the FCA regulations. So money is never coming into our own personal account. It's in a segregated, safeguarded account.
Yeah. Okay, great. And I'm going to ask you this question. This is a personal question, so it's up to you whether you want to do it. Someone's obviously done their homework and said, you've been at Soldo for only a few weeks and months. From your point of view, how has it been coming into a company at this time, which is basically coming into a crisis management situation? And anything you can sort of offer up to people going through the same?
Sure. No, it's again a good question. So obviously the timing is not ideal, but if I flip it around, it's enabled me to get into the business much quicker because carrying out a zero-based budgeting meant that I'm very quickly understanding all the costs of the business. Reforecasting the entire business, you very quickly understand the revenue streams of the business. You very quickly understand all the cost elements of the business, something that may have taken me maybe much longer if I had just joined and was doing other stuff. So I think it's given me a great insight into the business. And what's been amazing is that even in difficult times like this, and even though some of our use cases were travel and expenditure, we've been able to pivot our revenue stream so that our revenues actually have not dropped. So that's been a real positive as well, is that it's shown me that the business can adapt to finding different use cases and helping companies actually, and puts us more on the radar actually in this crisis period, because people can benefit from using our system.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you're doing this interview, as well. So I think you're doing a fantastic job of keeping your head above water.
Yeah.
We've had some great questions there, and I'm gonna leave it there. But where can people find you, and if they wanted to sort of continue the conversation, where do they go?
Probably LinkedIn would be the easiest. You can just send me a message via LinkedIn and I can then respond through that. I think probably that's the most logical place to start.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I understand that, I think you might have touched on it with one of the use cases, but Soldo are doing something specifically for coronavirus. So we'll put that into the show notes, because I think that would be really interesting for people to look at. And it's great that you're doing something specific for coronavirus and the people who may benefit from it quickly. So thanks again. Well, look, thank you for your time. This has been, the first time we've done a CFO debate live. Normally we do it in person in London, and it's been great doing it like this. And I look forward to doing the next one. But best of luck in your newish job.
Thank you very much, and really good to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Speak to you soon.